And we're live. It is Wednesday, December 17th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m., which is 2 p.m. in Kiev, and 8 o'clock a.m. in Norfolk, Virginia, or Virginia Beach, or the Hampton Roads area, however you choose to call it, whatever your vision of that neck of the woods is. And I want to tell you guys a little story about yesterday's show, which is a story about how things roll here on Dog Shirt TV. Yesterday, we had a show which was completely unplanned. Every aspect of it was unplanned, including the fact that Nastia was going to show up at all. She just did it. And she showed up because, and this is a little thing you have to understand about Anastasiia Lapatina, which is when she has questions she wants to ask, she just will bulldoze her way into almost any environment, including a live
Yes,
television show, to
that is
ask her
accurate.
questions.
That is
And it's,
accurate.
she's kind of like, think of like the Hermione Granger character who always sits in the front
That's
of the
so
room
flattering.
and puts her hand
Yes.
up in response to
This was me
any
in
time
college. It
there's an
was so annoying.
opportunity to ask a question. And she's always done, it's not just that she's done the reading, she's done like the reading and six other things. And so when she has a question about, FBI sting operations, it doesn't matter if Holly is talking about the karaoke party she's going to throw for herself, or Mike is, and so, then of course, but here's the other thing you have to know about Nastia. And here I'm not actually teasing her, I'm praising her. Her questions are almost always interesting ones. Um, and um, and so it's actually kind of fun to be interrupted with whatever you're doing, to be bombarded by questions with Nastia about something by Nastia about something she's reading, and often she'll ask me questions about things that I don't freaking know the answers to. But so anyway, that happened yesterday in the last 10 minutes of the show. And I thought to myself, self, this is actually a great subject for a show of its own. And I said to the two relevant people, you should come back and we should do a whole hour on this tomorrow. And there were only two problems with that. One is that Nastia has a baby, and the other is that Mike has a baby. And so we had a two-child care situation that impeded the development of this show. And both of them magically resolved themselves thanks to heroic efforts by family members. So shout out to the spouse who stepped in today to save the day, and the brother-in-law and the brother-in-law's girlfriend who stepped in today to save the day. And so all of which is just a way of saying that this show grows mellifluously out of yesterday's show. It is an entirely impromptu affair. And we are going to spend the hour talking about three things and any things that might flow from it. One is the development of independent anti-corruption bodies in Ukraine and their training and modeling by the FBI. Number two, how certain techniques that are highly available to the FBI, particularly sting operations, which are normal fare in the United States, are illegal in Ukraine, and some of the issues that this raises. And then number three, an area of specialty of mine. The fact that these Ukrainian bodies, which were created with U.S. assistance and advice, are dramatically at odds with the US constitutional premises of the unitary executive, and specifically that they're designed to screw up the unity of the Ukrainian executive. And so that is the advice when we do anti-corruption training overseas and help other democracies model anti-corruption efforts. We are not going to them and saying, well, SELA law says, or the Supreme Court is about to say in Slaughter that. That's not what we're telling them. We're telling them something else. And so all of that is a long-winded way of saying that the sun is shining. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great fucking day. And you are watching Dog Shirt TV. And it is a goddamn revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features is that sometimes we have just a subject that develops completely organically in the last 10 minutes of yesterday's show. And we say, we're going to devote the whole hour to that today. And we do. And it's going to be really high substance, and it's going to be a conversation that you absolutely can't get anywhere else. And another one of the revolutionary features is that we depend on family members to enable such conversations with child care relief. And we want you all to understand that there are babies who get in the way of the production of this show, and we love that, but they do have to be dealt with, which is a 7-minute long-winded way of introducing Nastia and Mike Feinberg back to the show to discuss Nabu, Sapo, the FBI, sting operations, and the unitary executive. Guys, welcome back. How was that for a narrative introduction to this show?
That was great. But something occurred to me while you were talking about just an offhand sentence you made. And that is, I know 2 points is not a trend, but I'm just going to be alarmed from now on anytime there is a Supreme Court case that has the word slaughter in the caption. Not a fan of the slaughterhouse cases, not a fan of what's about to happen here. Um, I, I'm just making note.
You raise a very interesting point. There are certain words that should never be in the caption of a Supreme Court case. Um, uh, you know, like, for example, uh, I don't know. Um, maybe Slaughter's a good example. You could also go with Plessy.
Yeah,
The
like
total
these are
universe of cases that should involve the name Homer Plessy.
yeah,
Maybe zero.
yeah. It's
Um, all right. So let's start, Anastasiia Lapatina, with how this issue of what the rules are in the FBI came on your screen, because you are sitting there doing reporting on the Ukrainian corruption cases, which we've talked about on the show, and the the anti-corruption police forces that were created in Ukraine. Uh, how does this relate to the FBI? Give us some background here.
So I'm working on a story about Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the its work, its founding, and the Ukraine's very unique anti-corruption infrastructure at large. And of course, I got interested in it recently because of Operation Ledas, which exposed large-scale corruption in the energy sector. And I was very interested in sort of, and still am very interested in tracking down the American involvement in the creation of this agency, because everyone talks about it here all the time. Like everybody knows that the U.S. had a great role. Then the U.S. always pushed the Ukrainian government to make sure the agency works and is independent and whatnot. So everybody, and there have been all of these scandals and controversies about just how involved is the U.S. embassy and all of this, like the one of NABU, the agency, was involved in the Trump impeachment scandal because it revealed Manafort stuff and the Black Ledger, and there was just like all of this controversy, and I haven't found any like good account, like a good old like deep reporting to show the narrative of like, okay, we're in 2014, Yanukovych just fled after the revolution. Some Ukrainians are sitting in a room with God knows who thinking, okay, we need to create this bureau. How do we do that? And so that's what I want to figure out. And that's why I'm talking to people who were involved in all of that. Um, but it's a very complicated subject from a legal point of view, which is why I wanted to talk to Ben and Mike about it, because I can pretty easily wrap my head around all of the political dynamics at play, but like I have no idea what's prosecutorial discretion or a bunch of other stuff that's important for the subject matter, and like the relationship between the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, because we have a specific anti-corruption bureau that investigates stuff, and then a special anti-corruption prosecutor's office, and the relationship between the two. And so like there's a lot of legal dynamics here, but the where the FBI comes in is, well, that's what I'm trying to figure out, just how deeply the FBI was involved. But then also, I find it very interesting that the FBI was involved to the extent of providing many trainings for detectives at NABU, like the first sort of cohort of independent detectives back in 2014 or 2015 that got the job. They were trained by the FBI, and sort of the sharing of experience that happens. And there's also a certain motif that I've identified here, that these new these newbies, these new agencies that work entirely independent from the usual law enforcement protocol in Ukraine, that's loyal to the president and just does ridiculous political shit. These bodies try to sort of get the best advice from the FBI and other law enforcement agencies abroad, and sort of bring the best Western practices. And that often clashes with the old guard of the law enforcement, which is why I would have these stories in like 2017 and others and other years when the SBU, for example, the State Security Service, would like arrest NABU detectives in the middle of an operation, blowing their cover. It would be an undercover operation, like a sting operation. And because this thing of like provoking a crime is like illegal in Ukraine, the SBU, just loyal to the president, would like blow the detectives' cover and arrest them and put them under arrest. And it would be this whole thing. And like NABU would make these statements of like, they're sabotaging our work. Of course, the whole thing would get immensely political as well, right? Because it's like the government is trying to pressure. Ben, you're muted if you're trying to say something. So there's a lot, like I find this story fascinating because it's this like, well, first of all, it's kind of a perfect lawfare story. And it's also like, it's this crossroads of like the legal dynamics and the political dynamics, and also the relationship between Ukraine and the US and
But let
how
me
that
ask you
manifests.
a question about what it means for a for stings to be illegal.
I that's an open question. I'm trying to figure out if it even is anymore. I definitely know it was a problem like back when it was a problem under Poroshenko. I'm not sure about now.
Yeah.
But
So,
what's your question?
well, so here's the question. Sting isn't a binary, right? Something is either a normal investigation or it's a sting. It's a sting is it's a bit more of a spectrum than that. So let's say Mike is an agent and you're a cooperating witness and you're alleging that, you know, Wittes is engaged in this terrible activity and he tried to get you involved. The obvious thing to do would not be for Mike to set up a, a sting operation with a fake agent pretending to be somebody. It would be to wire you and send you in to have a conversation with me about it. Now, is that a sting that would be illegal in Ukraine, or is that just wiring a cooperating witness, right? And so I'm
Well,
trying to
no. So what would be illegal
figure
in
out
Ukraine
what.
is like provoking the crime.
Could I complicate our discussion a little bit? I just want to,
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to point out, like, sting is not a term of art that federal law enforcement really uses. It's a colloquialism that
Interesting.
popular media has developed to describe what is actually a whole bunch of techniques used together sometimes. It is, as Ben described, wiring up a CHS or an undercover employee. It is documenting with video a transaction or a quid pro quo. It is what in other contexts in the FBI would be termed a controlled buy. It's a lot of things that just sort of happen at once. And because the media lacks the vocabulary to sort of break it out, they just
That's why you have
refer
lawfare.
to the bundle as a sting.
Right.
And yes,
So
in response to one of the questions, CHS is a confidential human source. That is the term of art the FBI uses for a covert asset or a confidential informant.
So what's illegal in Ukraine, it seems like to me, is that there is an article in the criminal code that outlaws like the provocation of a crime for the sake of like catching someone partaking in that crime, in the criminal activity.
But
And
do we
so the
know when
evidence
the
that you gather through that provocation, they're like, what's the word? You can't use them. You can't use that
suppressed?
evidence or whatever. Yeah. I don't
So,
understand this legal lingo.
but okay, but what if the
I don't know
crime
what
has
that
already
means in
begun?
practice. Well, exactly. So I guess this is all just like this is all just depends on like what a particular judge decides, right?
Well, I
That's
don't know. It depends how clear Ukrainian law is, and does law enforcement know that, oh, we can't do X because that would be construed as provoking the crime, or does law enforcement say, well, there's been a conspiracy in this underway for the last 5 years. We're not provoking the crime. The criminal activity started a long time ago. We're just intervening and gathering evidence.
yeah. Well,
Um,
so it says here that yeah, like if the law enforcement are sort of joining into an already ongoing criminal operation or activity, like some criminal stuff is already ongoing and they're just joining to be a part of that, then that's just like undercover work. And so I guess the problem is that in the past, at least, I'm not sure how it is now. I'll have to do more research on it. But in the past, the law enforcement agencies loyal to the government, to the president, would, I guess, use this law to make the case that anything that resembles this kind of work is just illegal, and they would just use the courts to make their case.
to sort of shut
Right.
down
Just to just
Naboo.
shut down the operation, which like they would like literally the SBU would like, as I've said, there was this very loud, like sort of infamous case of the SBU blowing cover of several detectives who've been doing undercover work for many, many months, and it was like a whole thing. Like they just sabotaged the whole operation and arrested them,
All right.
arguing that what they were doing was illegal.
So here's my question for Mike. What are, in the American context, or the American context prior to January, because I assume the American context is changing at this point, but what is in the American context, the limitations on what the FBI will do with respect to what are colloquially called stings? I mean, we talked a little bit about entrapment yesterday and how that is mostly not a significant impediment.
Yeah.
So what are the impediments? I assume they're more regulatory and internal policy, but like what are the limits to what the Bureau will do?
That's really tough to say because it is very much going to depend on the type of case, on the violation being worked. And, there's not a section of the FBI guidelines, which are collected in a book that is shorthanded called DIOG, which
The
stands
dial.
for the Domestic Investigations and Operations Guidelines. And just so people know,
But if you use the full name, you will be mocked, you will be ridiculed. You
it's
gotta
just
call it
DIOG.
the
I've never heard
dialogue.
anybody call it anything else. And just so people know, like, the overwhelming majority of this, except for like a 20-page section, is wholly unclassified. And I think the FBI even puts it up on their website. Like, people could look at
Yep.
this. Um, there's not a section, if I recall, on stings. There are sections on consensual monitoring. There are sections on video surveillance. There are sections on what you are allowed to use CHSs for. So there is and another big one, sorry, is something called otherwise illegal activity, which is when you do essentially foment the commission of a crime for the sake
Right.
of preventing a larger violation. And so there's no rubric of things you do for a sting. Nobody breaks it down this way, but what you're actually doing is taking a whole bunch of smaller operations, namely, more often than not, a controlled buy, which is where you sell something illegal to somebody who is not allowed to have it in a manner that the entire thing is, as you would expect, controlled, and they're never going to get away with it. It's the use of consensual monitoring versus Title III or FISA authorities to videotape something. Um, it's not a single set of authorities. It's very much a
Right.
tapestry of individualized techniques that come together in a way that's going to vary depending on the specifics of the case. I don't know if that elucidates things, but
No, so it's a really, really important point that I think most people, when Tom Homan is suddenly alleged to have taken a bag at Kava with 50 grand in it, and I just want to say I've been to Kava a number of times. Nobody's ever given me a bag with $50,000 in it. Anybody who wants to start, I'm fine with that. And I think Kava should have a promotion that,
Are we
one
talking
in,
about the Greek restaurant?
yeah.
Oh my
Except
God.
I think it's not Greek, but yeah,
It's Mediterranean. I think I've been there.
it's
Mediterranean, yeah.
Mediterranean. It's a pretty good fast casual place, and I think they should have a promotion in which, like, one in every 100,000 purchasers or something gets a kava bag with a wad of $50,000
It's
in
Willy
cash. They
Wonka's
should.
golden ticket, but with hummus instead of chocolate.
Exactly. Um,
Could you want to let's
the press calls that a sting operation, but what that really is merely a monitored, using, it's basically the equivalent of a controlled buy, only it's a seeing what we can get this person to do, based on some prior predicate understanding that he's amenable to taking bribes.
do you want to should we break down what might have happened in the Homan case to sort of explain to people, put some flesh on the bones of what I was just saying, and maybe go through some of the individual authorities that they would have needed to leverage before they
Yeah,
could
that's
do
a
what is
great
called.
idea.
All right, so there's a whole bunch of things at work here. Um, the first is going to be Homan was widely known, and I'm basing this entirely on public reporting. This is not a case I ever worked on. But Homan was known to be somebody who was in all likelihood going to be nominated for a position of public trust with the US government. He was about to be a government official. That would probably have made him what is referred to as a SIM, or sensitive investigative matter, which means just opening the case in and of itself would have required additional approvals beyond a standard case. You would have had to get gotten the office's division counsel involved. You would have had to have gotten headquarters involved to a degree they normally aren't. That doesn't slow it down immensely, but it's additional steps you have to take before you could leverage investigative techniques. Then let's complicate it a little bit more. This was a public corruption case, which means you would need additional approvals from what is called the Public Integrity Network, otherwise shorthanded as PIN, at DOJ headquarters to move the investigation forward. PIN exercises an immense amount of oversight on its individual cases in a way that the rest of the Justice Department does not. Precisely out of fears that the authorities could very well be weaponized against political opponents, but that's another discussion. Then you want to record Homan doing what he's doing. If it is what is referred to as a one-party state or a one-party consensual state, as long as one person involved in the transaction is winning, you don't need special permission to videotape the transaction. If you're in what
And the
is
FBI will comply with local law in terms of whether
kind
it's
of,
a
I'm
one-party.
gonna get to that. If it is a two-party state, that is to say, you cannot covertly record a conversation to which you are a party. You need to get something called otherwise illegal activity authority, which is a heavily oversighted mechanism for essentially breaking a state law in the process of enforcing a federal one. I'm simplifying a lot of the legal issues that go into that, but that's essentially what you're doing. Then, if you're using as much cash as is alleged to have changed hands, you have crossed a certain threshold. I'm not going to say what it is, but you've crossed a certain threshold where just to use that much money, you're going to need additional authorities from very high-ranking officials, both in your field office and headquarters. So before we ever get to the point where we're videotaping a bag of cash taking hands, we've had to go through, roughly half a dozen hoops for individualized techniques that will all come together.
But to go back to Nastia's point, there's a few things that you don't have to do there. One is you don't have to justify, hey, are we inducing or somebody to commit a crime? Because of course you are, and that's fine as long as there's ample predicate for the investigation in the first place.
Yeah.
And number two, you
And
don't have a
let me clarify something. If there is ample predication for there's different categories of investigations, but to have a full investigation, which is what you would need open in order to leverage all these techniques, you already from day one have to have articulatable facts that a violation of some federal law has occurred. So you're
or
not
is occurring.
going,
But so
yeah, or
the
is
point is
occurring ongoing. Yeah.
the point is you can't say I don't like Mike Feinberg. Let's see if we can get him to take a bribe.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? You
You
have
you
you
need to
have to
show
you
Mike
have to
Feinberg
say you have
had
to
a
say here are specific articulable facts
yeah,
that Mike Feinberg is engaged in, has engaged in, or is likely to, or is in the process of engaging in some criminal activity.
yep.
So let's see if we can verify that criminal activity by inducing him to do a little more of it.
Correct, and that is for pure criminal cases. I just want to note you can also open a full investigation, and this will become relevant in a different context. You can open a full investigation on articulable facts that there is a threat to national security as well.
All right. So here is where the unitary executive comes in,
Mhm.
which is the most shocking thing to an American ear about what Nastia is describing is you have one law enforcement agency that does not report to the president that is investigating corruption in the executive branch.
Mhm.
And then you have the law enforcement agency that does report to the president, i.e., the SBU, using other law to interfere with that investigation, arrest officers, and drag them into court to frustrate those investigations. And so that sounds like, to a unitary executive, even in the soft sense that we all believe in it in the United States, to a unitary executive model, that's kind of why you have a unitary executive. So you don't have that problem. Uh, the FBI, broadly speaking, doesn't have that problem, right? Or hasn't until this administration. And the reason is because it is part of the unitary executive. It, in fact, reports to the president, but in a normative, functional sense, it is insulated from the presidency by the 10-year term and by the fact that the attorney general and the FBI director are people of independent
Yeah,
stature
I
who.
this is not me editorializing. I think we're speaking in the wrong tense.
Yeah, no, I'm saying
Yeah.
until January,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, okay. All right.
Like that was the answer that we would have all given,
Mhm.
even under the FBI director and the attorney general we least admired over the last 50 years, right? Since
Yeah.
the death of Hoover and the jailing of Pat Gray, right? Or he never went to jail, but he
No.
was prosecuted. I forget which.
Yeah, and
Um,
Sessions
but
was
you would,
removed. I mean, yeah, it's
right. But you would always say, there is the thing that protects FBI integrity and is the personality and I don't mean that in the influencer
yeah.
personality sense, but the juridical personality of the director and the top ranks of the bureau,
Mhm.
and then the fact that the attorney general to whom they report, at least notionally, has taken an oath of office in which we trust, right? And that is our way of reconciling the unitary executive with the fact that the FBI investigates, among other things, the executive branch. Is that a fair summary, Mike?
Yeah,
And then Nastya, I
I think
see
it's fair.
you have 100 questions about this.
Well, yeah, I'll be short then. Basically, I think there's even more protections that are no longer there than the ones you mentioned. The fact that prior to this year, literally the only political appointee at the FBI was the director meant that you had a professional career cadre standing as a bulwark against him if he did get out of line or too political. The deputy director has always, prior to Bongino, been a career special agent. Uh, the general counsel, while picked by the director, has almost invariably been somebody with extensive DOJ and government experience. And the special agents in charge, who are the ultimate authorities in the field, were always people at the end of their careers who had a wealth of experience and judgment. None of that is the case anymore. Um, so that's point number one. Point number two, I'm going to poke a little bit at something you said. The FBI director does not report to the attorney general. The FBI director
Well,
generally
reports
reports
technically
to
to
the
the deputy attorney
the
general.
deputy attorney general, who, again, in most cases, is a little less politicized than the attorney general. A little, not a ton, but just like, there were layers of oversight and norms that I just don't think are there anymore. And, one more wrinkle and then I'll stop. There are times where the FBI has run into the sort of problems you've described in Ukraine. Um, it was not uncommon in the pre 9/11 years for the FBI to sometimes investigate something that turned out to be an intel community or DoD program. It happened to me twice in my career. I'm not going to get into the specifics, obviously, but you spend about a week or a month investigating something, and then you get a phone call saying, "Hey, let's talk on a secure line, and I'll explain why you shouldn't be poking around here." And that's normal. Since 9/11, that deconfliction process has gotten immeasurably better, which is why that phone call happens in a week or two versus a year or two. All right, I'll stop there.
Okay, my questions are first of all, is the Attorney General a political appointee?
Yes.
Yes.
So the president just handpicks a guy or a gal,
Well,
and
with
that's it.
advice and consent of the Senate. So the Senate can reject the person, but
Right.
at least in the context of the modern state, that since senators by and large don't don't exercise much independent judgment in their advice and consent function, the advice and consent function is really a question of whether the president has a majority in the Senate. Now, I say that, though, President Trump, Pam Bondi was not his first choice. His first choice was Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, right. The rapist, alcoholic, etc.
Right,
Right.
and he was not
Which
rejected by the Senate,
is
but he was
shockingly a description for so many people in his administration.
right. He was going to be rejected by the Senate. So it is not an unchecked power. It is a minimally checked power. But yes,
Okay.
the Attorney General is a political appointee. The FBI director
And
is
so,
not.
but you just
The
said it
FBI
is.
director is a
I just
political
wrote that down.
appointee. Sorry, the FBI director
No,
is a political
the
appointee
FBI director
with
is a presidential appointee.
What's the
And can
difference?
be removed by the president, but does not go out, but his term is not consistent with the president's term. So if you're named FBI director, Nastia, that you have a 10-year term, and unless you are fired, it doesn't matter
Uh-huh.
who is president. So you're politically appointed, but your term is not coextensive with the administration's term in the form of a normal political appointee. You don't turn into a pumpkin on January 20th at noon.
And if you're an attorney general, you do.
Statutorily, that is true. In practice, it has not been true since Trump came on the scene. I mean,
Well,
we
to
had
be
Biden
precise, it
stepped
has not been
away, but
true since May 9th of 2017, right?
exactly.
So, but Jim Comey did not leave office when Barack Obama left office. He left office when Trump fired him 4 months later.
And if you're an attorney general, you're appointed in the early days of the admin, and you stay until the last days of the admin, and you're like, there's a law that says
You
you're
serve
gone.
at the pleasure of the president, and you are assumed to be you will resign when that president leaves office,
Uh-huh.
unless the next one requests that you stay, like any other political appointee. So that does happen, by the way. Famously, not with attorneys general, never with attorneys general, but
Secretaries of Defense.
President Bush retained, President Obama retained Bob Gates, President Bush's Secretary of Defense, for example. That sort of thing is pretty normal in positions that are, in officials whose service is highly regarded across party, but never with attorneys general.
Okay. So several of the biggest challenges to NABU's work, as far as I understand, is one, their lack of independent wiretapping, which means that they can't wiretap somebody's electronics or phone or whatever without the SBU,
And
which is a
what
problem.
counts as wiretapping?
So as far as I
wiretapping is
understand,
another
it's
term that in the American context is used it is in fact a term of art, unlike sting, but in the American context, it is widely used in contexts far beyond what it is actually a term of art for. So if
Right.
you get, if Special Agent Mike Feinberg asks Google, or let's use a real example, Riverside retains copies of all of these conversations unless I delete them. If the FBI sends it doesn't need a warrant, or it does actually probably does
Yeah, I was gonna
under the
say,
Stored Communications Act. So, but these, all of these communications, including all the ones on which we plan all our crimes, are stored on Riverside servers. And
Right.
and if the FBI serves Riverside with process, it can get all of those. Now, many people would call that wiretapping. It is not wiretapping. That is the production of information under the Stored Communications Act because it is obtained in retrospect. It was recorded, it's not being tapped live. A wiretap is specifically a phone communication issue, and
Hmm.
it means that somebody is up on your line at the time that you make a phone call.
it's contempt.
So I
Well,
think that's,
in the criminal context, it is
yeah.
contemporaneous monitoring.
So I think that that last thing is the problem, like that Nabu can wiretap somebody's phone and like listen to their ongoing conversations without the SBU, which is of course a problem because the SBU is political and sabotages investigations. And so, apart from the bureau and the prosecutor's office, we also have a high anti-corruption court because that's how fucked up our system is. We've built an entire vertical to make sure all of these things are independent, and so the high anti-corruption court can give what is it called, like allow the detectives to place like kind of physical wiretapping. I'm just butchering this because I don't know what the terms are. But like, for example, in this operation Midas, where they were listening to the energy corruption scandal, like the high anti-corruption court let the detectives go and like break into the apartment and set up like tap the apartment and set up all of that equipment. So for that, they don't need the SBU, but for phone, like telephone communications, they need the SBU. And so that's one of the problems as well that's hampering Nabu's ability to work effectively in Ukraine. And they're lobbying for a change in law to have their own like wiretapping stuff.
Zelensky
So
loves that.
I'm sure he loves that. Another problem is the forensic analysis thing. And that's actually not just a Nabu problem. So there is like a forensic, like the body that does forensic analysis in the Ministry of Justice, which just like the SBU, political can't be trusted. And then there are also like a few independent, sort of private like institutions to also do forensic analysis, but all of them essentially can be trusted. And so what Nabu needs is they need their own, like, well, what everybody needs actually is for Ukraine to do a reform of its like forensic analysis institution and build a new body that could be trusted, that all of the law enforcement agencies would use one body. And
So the
so,
FBI traditionally has
what's
that.
the US? So
Yeah,
what's
so
the US
the
situation?
FBI lab, and it is used not just
It
by the
has its
FBI.
own,
It has
okay.
this lab that
Uh-huh.
is, you know, I think kind of first in class in the world historically, although it had a
Uh-huh.
huge scandal in the late 90s, where it had, I guess, botched enormous numbers of cases, and the modern Justice Department Inspector General is largely a creature of a set of investigations of the FBI lab in the late 1990s. So it's not an institution that's been free of problems over the years, but it is a remarkable institution that serves not just the FBI, but a lot of state law enforcement agencies will send stuff to the FBI
Right.
lab for verification. So it very much serves the function that you're describing. The problem, of course, is that it is under the equivalent of the SBU, right? Which
Right.
now
Or the
is
Ministry of Justice.
or
Yeah.
the Ministry of Justice, which is, it exactly the problems that you are raising that bear on the unitary executive problem, and that Mike is saying all the normative constraints and confidences that I have been describing are good only up to January 20th, right? That you could now really imagine that affecting the FBI lab, right? Why should we trust the scientific rigor of an institution like that any more than we would trust, say, the information coming out of the CDC or the FDA right now?
S- Does
But
does the
there,
US
let
have
me.
oh go ahead, Mike.
I'm just. I'm trying to think how to respond to that because I both agree and disagree with you. I agree with your points. I'm a little less concerned simply because what the FBI lab does and presents up at court can very easily be undermined by outside experts. Um, it's a lot easier, I think, to undermine scientific tests than it is witness testimony where it's one person's word against another. Like, I guess what I'm saying is in the grand
So
scheme
I
of
agree with
FBI.
that. I agree with that, but only to a point. And I'm hobbled here by remembering years and years of, I mean, it's like 1,000-page report
Yeah, it was
by the
essentially
inspector general about, how
largely
bad
dealing.
shit got at the.
Yes. It was largely, if I recall, having to do with firearms identification, with bullet
No,
matching to specific
no, it
weapons,
was.
as well as a whole host of other shit. No?
Yeah, it was not primarily a ballistics thing. It
Isn't
was,
that what
there
started
was a
it though?
whistleblower. I don't think so. What
Okay.
started it was a guy named Fred Whitehurst, who was a whistleblower who wrote a series of whistleblower complaints alleging, that people weren't washing their hands, that people, I
Okay.
mean, it was the most mundane and basic lab error stuff that was allegedly pervasive throughout
All
the
right. I may
thing
be
and the place. And
I'm
there was,
conflating other things. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and look, it caused large numbers of cases to be lost.
Yeah.
Um, and it caused, I mean, it was a huge, huge issue. Um, and, uh, and, it was one of the things during the Louis Free, one of the big sort of blots on Louis Freeh's record as FBI director, of which there were several. But uh, and y- y- you know, there's no reason that I can think of why that sort of stuff couldn't happen for political reasons rather than what was fundamentally Mike Bromwich's conclusion, which is lapses for all kinds of non-political reasons. That, as my recollection is, that it wasn't that the lab was corrupt, it was that there was pervasive sloppiness and bad lab practice. But I can't think of a reason why bad lab practice couldn't develop as a result of the political desire to have it develop.
Yeah. And I apologize. I just did some quick research. I was conflating a scandal in 2005 with the lab, which was something different than what you were talking about.
Yeah, so I don't remember that one because I was no longer working at Legal Times by the time
Yeah,
that
in
one happened. And
2004,
um,
2005, the entire bullet matching protocol was found to be bullshit. And there were massive numbers of people who were released as a result.
gotcha. So basically, Nastia, the answer is the FBI lab
We have an
served
institution that's
and we're
trusted and works.
working hard to fuck it up right now in exactly we are moving toward an FBI that is exactly what you're complaining that the SBU is, except that we don't have a Naboo, right? We don't have the alternative vertical. We've in
That's so
fact
interesting,
relied
right?
on the FBI to be that alternative vertical as well as, and we had a system that worked for how to keep it in both lanes at the same time, not without problems, not without, but but like that they could go out and train Naboo and say, here's how to do this. But by the way, don't set up a constitutional process like the one we're operating under, because at some level, they could look at this and say, because uh, a Yanukovych figure or a Kash Patel figure or a Donald Trump figure is not a theoretical possibility, right? And for them, so when they
Exactly, exactly.
advised people on constitutional norms, they said, make it independent. Don't do any of this bullshit this unitary executive bullshit, because you want the Mike Feinbergs of the world to be actually independent, not merely promised independence, as long as Kash Patel feels like it.
So does that mean that, I mean, no, that's not how I'm gonna ask it. Uh, I understand that the US law enforcement has like a million different agencies, it feels like. Are there little Silaviki wars between them? Like, are people, like, is there conflict between different agencies? And how does
Less
it
now,
manifest?
less now than ever before in US history, simply because they've been, and Ben, jump in if you think I'm being too harsh. They've almost all been deprofessionalized in the sense that there was just a massive bloodletting beginning on January 20th, where everybody who would really protect their agency's independence was jettisoned, which is why now you have these like Frankenstein monsters, immigration task forces where agencies are all joining together to do things that 50% of them have never done before in US history.
Yeah, so I somewhat disagree with that. I
How
think
come?
what you're describing is true of federal law enforcement. But remember, the overwhelming majority of law enforcement in the United States is state and local,
Yeah, I was
particularly
speaking
local
solely with
law
respect to the
enforcement.
federal government.
And right now you're seeing ICE have significant tensions with the Los Angeles Police Department,
Mhm.
with the Portland Police
Yes.
Department, with the Chicago Police Department. And these are because state policy and federal policy are not consistent with one another. And there have been, particularly in states in which there are Democratic governors, and particularly in states in which the Democratic governors have uh, cojones, particularly in Illinois, you really see those tensions between state authorities and federal authorities. And a good rule of thumb is that the federal authorities will always prevail in in short-term conflicts, but will almost always lose in long-term conflicts, because the Chicago PD is going to be there, and there
Mhm.
are many, many more of them than than the federal government can deploy ICE. And they're going to be there forever. Whereas ICE is going to show up, they're going to do their thing, they're going to bust up a Halloween parade or whatever, and then they're going to move on to some other city. And so, you
But
have, I would say, major tensions between state and federal law enforcement across a lot of different spheres right now. But within the federal law enforcement field, I agree with Mike.
Yeah.
have there been conflicts where a certain agency would try to interfere with the investigation of a different agency for the sake of protecting the president?
Yeah, well, you might look at a small matter in American history called Watergate, where the where the president seems to have asked
Right.
the
That little
CIA to
thing.
interfere in an FBI investigation to make sure that it yes is the answer, although the CIA is not a law enforcement organization.
Okay.
And it's
But I
it's
had there
more it is more common for there to be massive conflict, as Ben noted, between in public corruption
local
investigation,
and federal.
between local and federal, to the point where, just to give you an anecdote, when I was in the LA field office, we were doing a massive investigation of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department for essentially beating the living daylights out of prisoners in jail. And it got to the point where we received a directive. Los Angeles is a weird creature. A lot of the cities within the area don't have their own law enforcement departments, so they rely on the sheriffs. And it was to the point where we were told to not drive our official vehicles during our commutes through any cities or municipalities that were serviced by the sheriff's department, simply because we thought they were going to take, what's the word I'm looking for? They were going to target us. And
And of course, you're seeing the reciprocal of that now.
Wait, I
In
don't
a
understand the full extent of that. So what is the conflict over there? Like
so
who's trying to protect who or what?
we were investigating the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department for a variety of criminal matters. Um, and in turn, they were, to use a non-legal term, trying to fuck with us. So they were trying to slow down the
Okay.
investigation and harass FBI agents. So we were told, do not go through the municipalities which they service. Um, I remember it so well, not because of the affront to democracy, but because my commute got twice as long.
All right. So, but let me give you the flip side of that right now, where the local law enforcement may seem like the good guys. Um, so you have these ICE operations where ICE are wearing masks and basically grabbing people and throwing them into cars, right? And maybe they're ICE or maybe they're kidnappers. How do you know? Right. And so you have all these cases now where local law enforcement is looking at a situation and they're saying, wait, do we have a kidnapping on our hands? And federal law enforcement is saying you can't interfere in a federal investigation. And local law enforcement responds, how do we freaking know if there's a federal investigation or if somebody is, some masked person is, grabbing Ramiza Ozturk off of a street corner? And so these tensions, yes, because these are not public corruption investigations, but they are situations in which, but let me give you one that is notionally a federal public corruption investigation: the indictment of Letitia James. She is the sitting attorney general of New York. She brought cases against Donald Trump. He is retaliating by indicting her over and over and over again in the Eastern District of Virginia. Um, yeah. Um,
Well, he's trying to indict. Yes.
he's trying to indict her. He's bringing charges to a grand jury. Successfully indicted her once. That got thrown out. Now he's tried twice more. Yeah. So I mean, Is it exactly the same as what you're talking about? No.
Would a
But
better
remember
example would a better
Yeah, go ahead.
example would a better example actually be the non-prosecution of Eric Adams? If we're looking for a good analog?
Well, you're right. So yeah, so although that doesn't involve different law enforcement agencies taking different positions, it
Yeah,
involves corrupting the only one that matters.
it does, yeah.
But yeah, that's another example, right? We have a case against Eric Adams, and then it becomes politically advantageous to Trump to drop it. So he does.
Yeah.
And he fires as many people as he needs to in order to do it. That's not one law enforcement agency going to war with another. But I think what the point is a lot correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and I think what you're the point is that the specific modality that you're describing, which is that you have these two verticals, one's an anti-corruption vertical and one is a vertical that reports to the president, are at war with one another. That does not exist in the United States because federal law enforcement is unitary. On the other hand, what does exist in the United States is every single problem that you're imagining arising out of that, we have arising out of some other means, whether it's the Trumpian corruption of the single vertical, or whether it's federal state tensions, or whether it's something else, the same things are happening. Folks, this hour disappeared really fast. The question that gave rise to it was what happens if you put a Ukrainian reporter reporting on the history of Ukrainian anti-corruption uh, entities in the same call with a senior FBI agent who's now working for Lawfare, and just let them talk. And we now know the answer to that question. It has never been tried before, and now it has, and you watched it live. Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. It's going to be Holly's birthday party. She is going to dominate the show. She has a guest. She's going to do the monologue, and there's going to be a karaoke party at her house. I'm going to sing Prison Colon Ensign and Choose All Right, which requires that I learn the words such as they are to Prison Colon Ensign and Choose All Right, which is hard, but I'm going to do it because I think that highly of Holly Berkeley Fletcher. We're going to be back tomorrow. I just told you who the co-hosts are going to be. Didn't tell you who the guest is going to be. I'm going to leave that as a surprise. You're going to be there. I'm going to be there. It's going to be a blast, and it's going to be Holly's birthday, and so we're going to sing her happy birthday. See you then.